You see, something is going to happen. Something wonderful.
My God, it's full of stars.
Welcome to the NY Patriot Show. I'm very happy to be continuing this topic. I know I mentioned in the first episode, I think it's a very important topic. It's not something that I even have ever gotten into much myself, which I probably should have. But again, I think this is an interesting topic, and I wouldn't want anybody else on the show besides Robby to cover this. I'm lucky enough also to have I got Teresa with me co-hosting. As usual, I feel like whenever we have Robby on, it's supposed to be the three of us anyway. So, it's always worked well in the past. So, why change it?
I love Robby Marx story time.
Yes,
so
yeah, right.
My favorite.
He's reading us like a bedtime story, but it's the afternoon.
It's honestly, it's very enjoyable for me. So I'm excited.
Hell yeah, and everybody, all the listeners love him as well. So it's always a great time. You want to let everybody know what is up with your amazing podcast that you have as well.
Oh, well, thank you. So of course we have another show, The Spiritual Gangsters, which lately we've been doing the Clown World Weekly segment. So it's kind of like making fun of the news, but also just like analyzing it from truth perspective, shall we say. We just kind of like tear it apart and give our take on it. So it's a good time, and we have like a very nice little community growing in the chats.
Yeah, I really do love the chat actually.
Which I really like. So yeah, please check it out. We're usually live with the Clown World stuff Tuesday mornings. But of course, like you can always catch the replays and whatnot. But yeah.
Yes, Tuesdays at 10:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Is normally when we go live. And I will say, like what you were saying about the show, we look at like almost the news, like how the news is saying it, from a conspiratorial look, a cult, or maybe just logically looking at what they're saying and just being like, this just doesn't make sense. Definitely a good time. Now to get on to the guest, Robby, would you like to let everybody know stuff, the links, and I know your podcast and stuff that you want to promote and where they can find you?
Yeah. So my podcast that I have is the MettaMindcast, METTAMINDCAST, all one word. And basically it's just a series of shows I've been on, as well as deep dives into esoteric history that I do. And they kind of just come out depending on, the flow of my own workflow. But all my links you can find at my link tree, which is just RMarx, all one word, Linktree RMarx. And that'll give you all my Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, everything. And yeah.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks for having me on.
Of course. I may have, I probably screwed up and forgot to put your links in the bottom already. I'm sorry. But they will be after the show. So if you want to check out Robby's stuff, I'm sorry, or go to an older episode, leave this one, go to an older one, and his links are in there. I also do want to mention, I guess like maybe a quick shout out for myself, but I'm working on a website, the Occult Research Institute, and it's going to have a bunch of different contributors and a bunch of different topics and stuff on there as well. And Robby will be, I am going to have an art section, so Robby will be on there for his art, and there will be also links for all his stuff as well. And I may even find a section to put up his audio links to where you could actually listen to his podcasts from the site as well. But definitely, keep an eye out for that. And like I was saying, Robby will be on there. And if he ever, has the time or wants to, he also will have the option. And I'm not saying this to put him on the spot, but he will have the option to have like a blog there. As any other contributor that's going to be on there, they will have an option to actually have blogs. So you might actually get some like random thoughts and ideas and stuff from the contributors as well, besides the other work that they have done. Yeah, I really think it's going to come out nice. And I think people might actually be a little impressed to have how well I designed the site, actually. I have to give myself a pat on the back. I was like, damn, this actually looks good. For 2 weeks, I did a lot. Yeah, so, all right, so we're going to get into it. Solomon's Temple. Where do you want to start off with this, Robby?
Well, we had started to talk about Hiram.
Yes, that's right. And we cut it off there.
Now, King Hiram, who presented himself as a descendant of Melkart, who was basically the major deity of the Phoenician and Punic pantheons, and he was the tutelary god of Tyre. And Ezekiel, he says that Jehovah speaks to Hiram, "Thou hast said, I am God. I sit in the seat of God in the midst of the seas." So basically, that in the midst of the seas, in Tyre, they were Phoenicians, so they're sea people. So this was basically, appealing to the minds of the sea people in regard to Yahweh speaking to Hiram to help King Solomon build the temple, right?
Is that why they call it the Holy See?
Well, the Holy See, yeah. And that, I think that kind of, when you get into it, Solomon, he cast the molten sea in Solomon's temple, but I think it goes back to basically the sacred goddess form of the sea that is the foundational chaos that reality emerged out of.
Gotcha.
When you get into the talk of the sea, I think it's definitely referencing the goddess,
So it's even like an idea. I feel like that archetype of that idea is also just very common and deep in occultism and and stuff like that.
Very much so.
Yeah.
What do they say? The darkness of the depths of the sea are bottomless. In regard to when you start studying the occult. So now King Hiram, like we said, he was the king of Tyre, who were Phoenician boat people. And their trinity that they had was Melquart, who was the son of Poseidon, who Hiram said he was offspring of, right? With Baal, who was the son of Dagon, who was the patron deity of the mariners. And then with Astarte, who was the lady they called her the Lady of the Sea. So this was the trinity that they had in Tyre as far as within the temple services, right? And so the Hebrews, they called Hiram Chiram, which Hiram, Chiram. Chiram actually means noble born in Hebrew, right? And the Masons, the gavel, when they're running the ritual services in the temple, they call the gavel itself the Hiram.
Wow,
Relating back to, they now see the Masons have Hiram Abiff, and this is King Hiram of Tyre. And some people say they're not related, but when you get into Masonic writings, they're very much tied in with one another, especially when you get into looking at Mackie. I would say there's no differential between Hiram of Tyre and Hiram Abiff, who is considered by the Masons to be the grand architect.
You're talking about that like Mackie Encyclopedia or something?
Yeah.
Yes. I'm glad you mentioned that. I highly suggest for people to at least skim through that book.
Yeah, well, it's like over 1,000 pages.
Yeah. Well, that's why I said skim. I expected people to read that.
You can open that book to any single page, and there's something interesting to dive into.
You know what you could even do? Just think of like certain ideas or thoughts or secret societies, and just go through the book and see if it's there.
Yeah,
because in my opinion, in that book, I can't remember exactly which ones they are, so I don't want to get too specific and possibly be wrong. But like there were secret societies that I think that were in that book that you were like, well, I thought they didn't exist until so-and-so. So why are they even in this book prior to their supposed inception?
Yep. I was actually, like I said, I was deep in the books last night, and I found this society in Lebanon that was started by the Crusaders that is still active. At least, in the early 1900s. But it's definitely gets into a lot of interesting kind of wingnut topics. You know what I mean?
For sure.
Yeah.
I've thought about actually using his book just to do topics.
Yeah.
Right? You just flip a page, be like, oh, topic.
This is today's topic.
Isn't Tyre, Robby, as modern day Lebanon, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just-
So now the Masonic gavel, let's see. So by the master is called the Hiram, right? It basically controls, it directs, and it's also the hammer or the gavel that killed Hiram Abiff when he basically was trying to escape the temple, and the three initiates were wanting the secret word, and he wouldn't give it to any of them, and they actually give him three like vital blows to the head that end up killing him. So it's actually the Hiram gavel that kills Hiram Abiff, that runs and directs and organizes the whole of what the Masonic process within the temple is.
Now, would you take that because would you take that as all like kind of like symbolism instead of like actual to be taken as literal?
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing, you know, there's a whole thing that Hiram Abiff was never a real character, you know, and a lot of these things are symbolic, just in regard to carrying certain thought forms and concepts that are fundamental understandings of how the world works. You know what I mean? So let's see. Now, the architect of Solomon's temple, being Hiram, King Hiram of Tyre, was also called the widow's son, right? And he came from the daughters of the tribe of Dan. And
Stop.
yeah. So, and he was called Hiram the Builder, and he was over the tribe of Naphtali, which were one of the 12 tribes of Israel in the northern sector, right? And he was a worker in brass and had knowledge of mechanical arts. And we're going to see as we go through this, he's actually building, because like you get in a lot of the Roman, when you're reading about the Roman temples, how they would use steam to animate open and closing doors and doing, well, Hiram Abiff also had these skills in working with mechanical type things. And we'll get into some of those animated things that were within the Temple of Solomon as we move through, you know. Let's see. Now, Hiram's masons, the masons that he brought with him, they worship the evolving idea of Dionysus, basically coming out of Osiris and the killing of and cutting up of Osiris. Dionysus was ripped apart by the Titans. So we see this consistent theme of these gods being cut up or ripped apart in essence, right? And when we get into these Dionysian masons, the masons themselves speculate that Hiram was a member of this Dionysian mystery school, right? And basically, these Dionysians were sacred architects, and
Always architects, huh?
What's that?
Always architects, huh?
I know, right?
Even when I was in, I think I had said something to Mike from Hush Hush Conspiracy Podcast. We were in like the Yale graveyard, and like there was, I think we found like some Masonic tombstones. I could be wrong. Neither one of them was actually an architect, or like somebody next to it was an architect. And I was like, you know, does that even mean that's their job? Yeah. Like, you know, like, I don't know, like even like when Rex, not to get, you know, into this, but like even Rex from Gilgo Beach, he was an architect. It just seems like very, like, you know, that word, it's like, you know, are you even really an architect in the way the person or the public believes, but does it mean something completely different, actually?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, well, you know, there's designing buildings, but you can design many things on many levels.
You design people's reality.
Oh, yeah. Exactly.
That would be a grand architect, in my opinion.
Yes.
You know, something like that.
Grand architect. Yes. Yes. So these Dionysian architects, they were basically the priests of Bacchus. So you have the Bacchae. If if you want to read Euripides, he goes into the Bacchae, and as far as the thoughts of these architects coming out of Egypt and moving into Greece, and mostly when in later times, Dionysus was mostly worshipped in Athens. So this is something that directly ties in with Greece and the building of Rome and Roman thought, and basically the creation of the modern world that we live in now.
Democracy and all that, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Democracy is a whole nother matter. But yeah. Now they devoted themselves to architectural pursuits and established some 1,000 years before the modern Christian era, right? And the society, they are a society of fraternal builders coming out of Asia Minor, basically. And exclusively held the privilege of building the temples for the mystery schools and the public buildings within these evolving, I would say they're very communist societies, because the revenue would generally be given to the temple, and then the temple would build the public buildings, and they were kind of creating what society was cohesively, coming out of these ideas, and like I said, they're linked in with the Dionysian mysteries. The initiates, it basically evolved around this cosmic egg, very much like in Egypt, how we had the cosmic egg come down into the Nile, and they would roll it out and they incubated it, and the goddess form comes out of this cosmic egg, with lightning flashing. There's always lightning flashing within these ceremonies.
Get the electricity going.
Yeah.
You gotta power it up.
Getting the electricity in the mind.
Yeah, for real.
Giddy up.
and also I've been on this deep dive into Mother Rhea. I basically, Mother Rhea was the wife of Nimrod as Semiramis. She's also related to Ishtar, Inanna, basically going back to Isis, who says she is all these goddesses in form as far as the evolving goddess form. But Mother Rhea, I've recently found in Plutarch that when she was exiled out of Babylon, or had her head cut off and became Juno, and she went to Italy, Plutarch says that Mother Rhea, also named Sylvia, was the mother of Romulus and Remus. So we're looking at basically this Mesopotamian, Babylonian, Egyptian philosophy, also through Dionysus moving into Greece, but basically transplanting and basically being the foundation of Rome itself, because Mother Rhea within the temple system in Italy, they were called, the temple priestesses were called the Lupa, and Romulus and Remus were raised by a wolf, and the Lupa is a wolf. So, it's all, I'm just following the serpent, king line, basically.
Sorry, Robby, Rhea was also the wife of Kronos, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Interesting.
And she was also the wife of Nimrod as Semiramis, and Nimrod ate his children just as they were born, just as Saturn ate his children just as they were born. So it's the same story. It's just different cultures as these philosophies are moving and expanding, almost in a fractile manner. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Changing names depending upon the needs of societies, but carrying the same philosophical elements throughout. And basically these Dionysian architects, that they could recognize each other either in the dark or in the light with their signs and symbols, right? And this basically united this brotherhood that spread all across India, Persia, and Syria, all into a common brother. And the Masons do say that these Dionysian architects were essentially part of the beginning of what the Masons were in regard to later on in 1717 with the establishment of the Masonic orders within England. So
Interesting.
now, let's see. So the Secret Order of Operative Masons brought the worship to Solomon's Temple. And they arrived. I've got different dates. One is 1012 BC and another is 968 to begin work, forming the first Supreme Council of Grand Masters. And this is essentially when they're bringing the Hebrew Masons coming out of the Zadoks together with these Dionysian Masons that Hiram is bringing. The Hiramites is what they call them. And so we have these two channels of Masonry kind of coming together and culminating to build Solomon's Temple. So,
Interesting.
yeah. So now, and it was also essentially the uniting of the Israelite thought line and the pagan world coming together, and essentially mingling and mixing, and this is going to change and establish new thought forms within the people as they're together. Let's see. And now Hiram's temple was based off 3 temples from Tyre, the temples of Baal, Astarte, and Melkort. And all 3 of these temples had the twin pillars of Yakin and Boaz, right? So this is something that we're seeing coming into Judaism, coming out of the Phoenicians, which you could argue are the same people being related to the shepherd kings that went into Egypt, eventually migrating out and taking Cana, So, and with these twin pillars, essentially the left-hand pillar is the female and the right-hand pillar is the male. Then you have creation and destruction. And these pillars, let's see, where are we at here? I already said that. So now in Phoenicia, the temples that they took these pillars from, they were Yakin the pillar was covered in gold, and Boaz was an emerald green pillar, and the emerald green pillar, they said, would basically glow at night. So this one, and there's speculation that the pillar was glass, like a green glass, and they had a torch inside of it that would illuminate it at night. So you have this, one is the golden, relating to the male personification of the sun, and then the other one is the green, which is related to the underworld and the sprouting of the plants and the vines and the illumination of matter itself, I think, essentially.
It reminds me of like we need to get back to the Mormons. I mean, I guess I always do like bringing them up, but they had those lights. When they talk about coming over here on their boats, I think they found like a glowing rock that they broke into pieces that they used as like a light, with their beehive at the front of their boats.
Oh yeah, with their magic 3D glasses.
And special underwear.
Yeah,
magic 3D glasses.
Well,
and you need a hat, 3D glasses and a hat. You're good to go.
Yeah. Well, man, you gotta, if you're gonna play the part, you gotta wear the outfit. So it's I almost think the underwear, the sacred undergarments, have to do with the Masonic apron on some level, But let's see. So now Baal had the horns of a bull. He was the son of Dagon, who was that fish that came out of the water and basically civilized humans. And he's linked with the Quinatar, who fathered the Merovingian kings. So whose colors were also gold and emerald. So we have this tie kind of moving into the Merovingians. Now, Dago coming from Dagon, was also called as Deus, which is where the Christians get Deus as the term for the Lord. So there's a direct tie-in with that. It's Dua Pater, basically as God the Father, which is Jupiter in essence. And Jui is God, and Patar is Father. And the Patar stones, which is where we also get Peter for the church. The Patar stones were essentially the standing stones of the Druids. They were the obelisks of the Egyptians. Anytime you see these phallic tall stones, these are the Patar or the father stones, basically being the father that inseminates the mother. So, you know,
Peter was the rock.
Peter
Apparently.
was the rock.
Jeez, Robbie.
I know, right? I know. So now we're looking circa 957 BC here by most sources. And the work on the temple began in the 4th year of Solomon's reign in the 2nd month, called by the Hebrews Yor, Jour, and Artemitus by the Macedonians, who were a lot of Solomon's followers. Now, this was the 592nd year after the Exodus. So we're looking at almost 600 years after the Exodus. And this is all these figures are numbers, and we're going to get into a lot of numbers here, because when you get into the Hebrew gematria, there's just tons of numerology involved in the building of the structure and its general evolution, right? So 592 years after the Exodus, it was 1,020 years after Abraham came into Canaan. It was 1,440 years after the flood, 3,120 years after the patriarch Adam. And, you know, within the Hebrew texts, all this is hashed out into like periods of evolution evolving within the 6,000 year calendar towards when they would blow the shofar during apocalypse, basically, and the end of time, where heaven would descend to earth. You know, so that's essentially the squaring of the circle, or like as the Christian prayers say, on earth as it is in heaven, because it's the idea of bringing heaven to earth. Or when you get into the Templars, how they have the figure of meat with the chains on the sun and the moon, basically pulling the heavens down to earth, you know. So the foundation of the temple was laid very deep underground, and it was said to be made with all white stones, as far as and they were 60 cubits in height, 60 cubits in length, and 20 cubits in width. And the front entryway faced the east to the rising sun. And let's see, we can kind of skip that. There's a bunch of exterior rooms that they put all together almost in a maze-like fashion. The roof beams were timbers, and this is the timbers that Hiram was basically bringing from the forests of Lebanon. And these Lebanese cedars were basically sacred plants. And you see a lot of gods that are basically, even Osiris was seen as the tall standing tree. You know, so you have this idea that these trees are almost representations of God himself, and how they point at the heavens, essentially, you know, pointing up. So, and now the cubit, the Egyptian cubit of the time was 18 inches, just so you can get an idea of kind of how big some of these things are. The inside of the temple was a 40 cubit chamber sanctuary that had another 20 cubit sanctuary, the secret chamber, that was inside of the sanctuary, or the Holy of Holies, right? That it is essentially a cube inside of a cube, is how they laid it out. right. So we're dealing with a lot of this cube philosophy going back to, again, Nimrod and Saturn, and how we talked about, them being related in the black cube of Saturn. And they had veils of blue and scarlet of the softest linens embroidered with what they called strange flowers. There was 2 large cherubim of solid gold that were 5 cubits high, with wings that were 5 cubits wide, basically as winged bulls almost. Some say that you see in like Indiana Jones with the angel or the human form with the wings. Some people say that they were with the bull wings. And if you go back into Samaria and look at the original symbols of the cherubim, they were essentially those winged bulls that we see that were the guardians of the doorways going into the sacred places and the public spaces. In the exterior porch, we talked about the 2 pillars of Yakin and Boaz. And so now the pillars were made of hollow brass that were 4 fingers thick, is what it says. And they were 18 cubits high and 12 cubits in circumference, with lily work on the pillars themselves. And I've seen in some places that these are essentially blue lilies, which are the Egyptian blue lily of the Nile, which is a plant that was an entheogen that you can basically smoke, and it gives you a heightened sense. It's a bit of a bit speedy, but it is it's considered to be a hallucinogenic.
Well, it's like the flower in Black Panther. I think it's like a blue lily looking kind of thing.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
If that's the case, the blue lily of the Nile, yeah,
it makes them like hallucinate and go to like the realm of their ancestors.
100%. That's the blue lily of the Nile.
It's like
yes.
something to do with like the blue rose. That's like an idea in Twin Peaks, I think.
Yeah,
Big and
that's
Fire
the
Walk with Me.
Unexplained anomaly is the blue rose in Twin Peaks.
Oh, you know what I did? I have going by the eye symbolism. In the eye series that we did, I have, like in other shows after that, gotten a little bit more descriptive, and there is parts inside of the eye that I actually do think, I do question if, like, even, the idea of Rose and Crowley has something to do with, like, either visions that you're going to see prior to crossing the abyss, or, like, literally parts inside your eyeball. Like, I do think the Aura Serrata does actually look like, if you were to use the Aura Serrata going up the hyaloid canal, it could actually look like a flower petal that has fallen and its stem is sticking up. Or you can look at the stem going up and then turning into a tree, which is now your vitreous veins and the vitreous humor. But I do question sometimes, like, these flowers that are being mentioned, like, this blue color or whatever. Does that have something to actually do with, like, even inside your eye? Because my opinion, like, the Aura Serrata does, I mean, you could easily say that almost looks like a daisy petal, believe it or not, something like that. It's very, very flower-looking, like, if you were to even Google it and look at it, the way it's depicted. So I do think there is a lot of eyeball symbolism in stuff. So I do question, like, sometimes these types of flowers and roses. I mean, definitely for roses. I mean, to me, certain visuals that I see before crossing the abyss, in my opinion, looks like explosions that could be blooming roses.
Of rose.
Yes. And I even think that's the whole idea that David Lynch takes you down for a fucking ridiculous amount of time when he shows the atomic bomb in season 3. I think that whole time you're watching all those explosions and all that shit is him just dragging out that one, I think, marker for people who have these experiences as a common shared thing. I think he just dragged out that experience for people to be like, do you get it yet? Like, do you see it? Because he does even say he'll drag out shit that he thinks is important because he wants people to be like, oh, okay, now I see it 3 minutes later. Sorry for that long-winded thing, but I do wonder about, like, flowers and especially like a blue one.
Well, and pomegranates also.
They very much look like the shit that actually are inside your nerves hanging in that liquid in your eye.
And in the breasts, as far as the mammary and production of milk.
It totally looks like that.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's yeah, a lot of well, and that's where you get into a lot of the mystic ideas of the plants being associated with the organs. And as far as healing yourself, you need to take plants that basically complement said organ. In regard to sympathetic magic within the natural world.
Oh, you know, and even the reason why I went on that whole tangent to get back to where I was going to go for real quick, you were talking about like hallucinations and things associated with flowers. If you were to start going by where I'm saying that part in your eyeball is a flower, at that point you'd actually probably stop being like, you'd technically be working or reversed, going back into your eyeball. Technically, you would be now looking at shit you normally wouldn't perceive.
Right.
So that could come with thinking you have hallucinations.
Yeah, I think also with a lot of the hallucinogens, what you end up seeing is the actual functioning of the organ itself, because you're taking in more information in regard to neural processing. You know what I mean? It's definitely interesting with the eyes themselves and the ears with the colloquial, with the little shell and bone in there, and it's the body is quite wild.
And then like if you look at like a lot of things that like natural growing things that might help with aiding in hallucinations, they all look like something that's either like your brain or your eyeballs. I hate to say it, they all grow in something that looks like could be replicated in your brain.
And when you look at the temples themselves, they're basically laid out in the human form, as far as where you enter, where the body is, where the heart and the brain are, the sanctum sanctorum, where that's at, just getting into the temple being the temple that is the human body, and how the outer temple relates to the inner temple.
Yeah, it all reflects in and out.
Yeah. So here we're going to get into the left and the right hand pillar. The right hand pillar, Yakin, it means he or it will be established, right? And this is wisdom and temperance, and it represents the bloodline of King Solomon. Basically ending on one side with Jesus in his crucifixion, and then it ends on the other side with Haile Selassie, or Jah Rastafari, basically King, Haile Selassie of Jamaica, or Ethiopia. I mean, as just the Rastafarians in Jamaica. But yeah, the Ethiopian, and that's later we're going to get into Sheba, and basically the transference of the Solomonic wisdom and line through Menelik into Ethiopia. And that's why the Ethiopians have the oldest Bible that there is, before it was, edited and rearranged by King James. So it also represents mathematics, the spirit of law and order, and the faith in the one. Essentially monotheism, as far as returning back to Kether and the Godhead itself. So Yak means one, and Hin means only. So it's basically the liberty of being within the existence. And it's the south pillar, because the door faced to the east, right? So the right pillar was the south pillar, and it is basically as beauty and prudence. So and then in Kings 7:21, it says, in regard to erecting the pillars at the portico of the temple, the pillar to the south he named Yakin, and the one to the north he named Boaz. So the left pillar means in him it is strength, which Bo means in, and Az means strength. So Boaz as unity of love, or agape. And this being a matter of the ultimate fact in all things, as far as love being the thing that supersedes all, right? And in the book of Ruth, it says that he brings back an altered estate back to an alienated estate back to the family. So by the establishment of the temple and these pillars, they're basically taking this ancient bloodline that's been drifting and polluted and bringing this estate back to them and establishing them again as kings on earth. So, and that's as redemption, as agape, as the north, as justice and darkness. Interestingly, because justice has, you go back to Plato, and justice has nothing to do with right or wrong. It's all about the will of the God, because we can't ultimately understand the long-term workings of the cosmos, and therefore justice is arbitrary, and it generally has nothing to do with right or wrong in the history of the idea of justice. It's the will of the Godhead in the turning of the cosmos. So now Solomon, he cast what's called the brazen sea, right? And if you read what is it, the German, oh, I'll have to think of his name, but the let's see, so it was a figure that was of a hemisphere, which is basically a half a sphere, right? And it was 16 feet wide, the thickness of a palm, and 8 feet in depth. And the middle resting on a 10 cubit diameter pillar with 10 spirals going around the pillar, holding this half, it almost looks like a half eyeball with the pillar holding it up, right? And positioned around it were 12 oxen, 4 in each direction as the zodiac. So we're establishing the zodiac. It was said to contain upwards of 6,000 baths for people coming in to wash their feet before they sacrificed. But I don't see how it can be 16 feet wide and 8 feet in depth and have 6,000 foot baths. So you almost have to think that a lot of these numbers are exaggerated or brought to higher levels to establish greatness, or in regard to numerology and gematria, right? And the altar was also cast. See, so there's this debate with the altar cast out of bronze here, but the altar was also said that it had to be built by hand and couldn't be made of any hewn blocks. So basically the masons were completely discluded from the altar to Yahweh, going back to the sacrifice of Isaac, going back to the altar of Adam and Eve, and how this altar evolved, where they're building this Temple of Solomon, right? The altar was never to be made of any hewn stone. It was strictly to be made of hand stacked stones, from nature, of nature to nature, right? But nonetheless, it's Josephus that says that the altar was also cast out of bronze and was 20 cubits by 20 cubits by 10 cubits. And so basically that's doubling the cubic altar, right? Which there's a big thing in the histories where they didn't believe the altar was working anymore at one point, and they went and basically through prophecy, I think it was the Sibylline that told them that they had to double the altar. So there's this idea of where they basically took the cube and stacked it on top of the cube, and this became the altar. A double cubic altar. Yeah. Let's see. Now there was 10,000 candlesticks with one candlestick that would burn during the day. There was 100,000 golden veils that were woven. There was 60,000 bowls, 1,000 sacerdotal robes with precious stones mounted on them. There was one crown of God with his unspoken name inscribed upon it. Essentially Yahweh Vade, which nobody's supposed to say, but it's been more revealed, and it's but there are still some Hasidics that would say that you're not supposed to say it because it's something that you can't understand or ever even get close to. So to say it is a misrepresentation of what it even is as within its own essence.
Right.
I mean, they had purple girdles for every priest. So you're getting into the purple of the Phoenicians coming into the priesthood, and the aprons that they would wear, or the girdles in Solomon's temple, were purple of the royal Phoenician. There was 200,000 fine linen garments for the Levi singers. So apparently the Levi's were like the gospel choir at Solomon's temple, and they would be doing their singing with 400,000 harps made of fine brass. And now the temple itself was for the priests only, and specifically for the honor of this Hebrew god. And beyond this, outside of the main temple for the priests, right, Solomon built a smaller temple in the shape of a quadrangle, or a square, basically, with gates very high on each side. And this was for all the people who were pure in observance of the law, but were not priests. And it had silver doors, whereas the temple itself had gold doors, right? Then, there's a side note. Solomon constructed during this process what he called the Forest of Lebanon, and he used 666 tons of gold. And within the Scottish Rite Freemasonry, their 22nd degree is called the Prince of Lebanon, or the Forest of Lebanon, and it relates to this and these golden trees that he made were said to always have fruit that were ripe and ready to eat hanging. So it's just interesting. It's almost like they made it and then they bring fruit in and hang it almost symbolically, all off of these golden trees. And then the 22nd degree of Scottish Freemasonry is the number of the master builder. And this directly relates to, like I was talking about earlier, that secret society in Lebanon of these Masons that was set up by the Crusaders. They were called the Derses of Lebanon, and they basically had their temple on Mount Lebanon itself. So let's see, now Solomon, as they're building the temple and they're needing all these supplies from all these different regions.
That's right. You did say 666 with the gold, right?
Yeah, 666.
I did find that interesting. Just even like with Tiferet, gold would go with the sun, which the number on the going with gematria, whatever, the tree of life. The value is 666. So I mean, that matches even the gold or the alchemical corresponding metal.
Yeah. It all folds together so neatly, when you really examine it. It's pretty wild. So Solomon, in order to maintain the needs for all these different, he needed incenses and gems and, precious metals. And then you have all the sacrifice of all the animals. And so to facilitate the need for all these different things, Solomon began to marry different wives from different regions to open up facilitating trade of goods and services throughout the region. And it was said he had 700 wives, right? And they were from kingly and high merchant families, and then on top of that, he had another 300 concubines that he was said to service. So
700 wives and 300 concubines. Damn.
Yes, that's a lot of women.
7 and 3.
Solomon's a G.
Oh, you know what? I was looking up That's so funny, Wade. You said the 7 and the 3.
Yep.
I was looking up, I have noticed 7 and 3 a lot, and I do think there is this correspondence with that even on the Tree of Life. That's like Netzach, and then Binah, which would be Venus and Saturn, and like you kind of get like the green and black that I've seen, like even in the Matrix. I think that symbolism is used a lot. But I just happened to, I can't even remember. This was when we first started. You mentioned Hiram Abiff, and then I was like thinking of maybe the gematria, the value of that if it matched something I was thinking of, and I looked it up, and Hiram Abiff does equal 73 in simple.
Yeah.
So I mean, even you're back to the 7 and the 3 again.
7 and the 3. Yeah,
it's really weird.
Yeah.
So let's see, where was I at? So with all these other wives coming in and these concubines that he had, he began to alter his beliefs in regard to how he felt, because when you have all these other cultures inflecting, he basically began to participate in practices that were not allowed by Yahweh. So essentially, it was the red heifers that they would slaughter, which would be a female cow that they would slaughter within the temple service, right? An unblemished, pure red heifer. And he started to let oxen come in, male oxen for sacrifice as well. And they also started to allow lions to come in with him and sit next to him while he was on the throne, symbolic of the Sun King. And as far as the lion skin, within the mysteries, the enlightenment of the individual as far as conquering and rising above, But it was said that Solomon knew the languages of the beasts of the field, the birds of the air, which would be the quote unquote language of the birds, or the alchemists, the language of the demons, the language of the spirits, and of the specters of the night. Right. And Solomon, he formulated incantations to cure diseases and to banish demons. He could send demons, quote unquote, hither and thither, to deliver messages. Demons were said to be bringing water from India to keep all the tropical plants in Palestine alive. And Solomon had an eagle that sat on his back or on his shoulder, right? And in some stories, the eagle would actually, when he wanted to go somewhere, he would just tell the eagle, and the eagle would fly with him and take him to where he needed to go. Right.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Right.
And at one point he put the ring, and we'll get into the ring here in just Solomon's ring in just a second, but he put the ring in this eagle's mouth, and basically the eagle held it while he brought forth or Azazel to tell him the mysteries of the universe. Right. So he's learned, and Azazel, I believe, is the angel that got kicked out of heaven. And additionally was the last fallen angel. So there's a whole storyline there when you go back and look at that. So now Solomon's birth name was Jedediah, which means friend of God. And before taking his kingly name of Solomon, or essentially the solar man, and Asmodeus is linked to Solomon. And Asmodeus said, "Thou art the wisest of men, but I shall show you something you have never seen before." And Asmodeus stuck his finger into the ground, right? And basically this two-headed man came out of the ground, called a Canite, who was one of the people who dwelt underground within the hollow earth.
Stop.
Yeah.
Sounds like Coley Shaw's story that's circulating Instagram.
770, baby.
Yeah.
Oh
Hey,
my God.
man. the underground tunnels.
Yeah,
Yeah.
under Shabbat Lubavitch.
History, man. It's just all scattered through history as far as you go back, man.
Maybe that's what came up in the Miami Mall out of the
Yeah.
ground. But bam. Who
There was
knows?
even stuff that like
that looks more blue beam to
Yo,
me.
seriously.
I'm probably like completely off, but like there was even times where I saw like the descriptions of what they thought the tunnels looked like over in fucking Gaza, wherever the hell that shit's going on in Palestine.
Oh, the
Those
Hamas.
underground
Yeah,
cities.
yeah, and I'm like, yo, that looks like somebody just took a bunch of like the Olympic spirit sigils and just fucking made a design out of it.
Mm,
I was
Yeah.
like, I don't know. I was like, this almost looks very sigil-like.
right. So now this Canite that he brought up from inside the earth, right? Because he couldn't go back, he ended up marrying and having 7 children. And one of those children had 2 heads, like his father, right? And that one child tried to claim a double portion over all the other children because he said he was 2 instead of 1, right? And so this was something that basically tested the wisdom of Solomon. And you've heard about the story of Solomon cutting the baby.
Yes.
And the real mother saying, no, don't kill the baby. Well, so Solomon, what he did with this Canite was he poured boiling water on him. And as a result, both heads started screaming. And he said, you're not 2, you're 1. So you get 1 share just like everybody else. So that kind of, but even there's stories of animals coming to Solomon to get his wisdom. There was a snake that basically was caught and told this traveler that if he freed him, he would give him a great treasure. And then when he freed him, he took him to the snake's treasure. And when the guy was trying to get the treasure, the snake bit him. And so they went to Solomon, and basically it relates to the bruising of the head and the bruising of the heel, and kind of tying into that whole ancient mystic philosophy, with this snake story coming to Solomon for his wisdom. So now while building the temple, there was an unknown demon that kept stealing a workman's food, who was Solomon's favorite page, right? And Solomon prayed to Yahweh, and the archangel Michael brought Solomon a golden ring, and this having a seal inscribed in a small stone. And from all the descriptions we get of this ring, it's a golden ring with a red stone, and there's a debate as to specifically what was inscribed on the stone itself, right? And let's see, Michael said, take, O Solomon, son of David, the gift of the highest Zeb-al-At has sent you, and with it thou shalt lock up all the demons, male and female, and with it thou shalt build Jerusalem. So it's interesting that Michael is basically saying this is a gift from Zeb-al-At, which I have been trying to find exactly what that is, and I still haven't found a reference to this name that is the gift that gave Solomon the ring, right? So now, as far as the red stone itself, right, there's many red stones within the natural world. As far as rhodochrosite, there's red topaz, there's red agate, there's red tourmaline, there's numerous red stones. But when you get into the esoteric sources of the stone, a lot of people believe that this was set with a fragment of the Chintamati stone. If you've ever heard of that?
No.
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 So this is a wish-fulfilling jewel that is within Hindu and Buddhist texts. And basically it's a red stone, and it's equivalent with the philosopher's stone of the Western alchemists. And it is a fabulous stone in the procession of Vishnu. So within the Hindu text, they talk about Vishnu having this stone. And then within Buddhism, It is held by the Bodhisattvas. Two of the Bodhisattvas, I'll see if I can say these names, Avalokiteshvara and Kshitigarba. And it was also carried on the back of the Lungta, which is the horse of the wind, or the wind horse. So this Chamati stone, basically some believe that a fragment of this stone is what was in the ring, right? Now, as far as the inscription, as far as the carving on the stone itself, there's most of the sources you find say that it was a pentalpha, or a pentagram, right? And which is basically a triple triangle. It's the pentalpha of Pythagoras. It represents the alpha from 5 positions, which basically relates to the movement of Venus around the earth within the 5 positions, right? The morning star and evening star. And the number 5 formed by the first odd and the first even number, which are very sacred within gematria and numerology, right? So the 2 and the 3, and Cornelius Agrippa tells us that by virtue of the number 5, it has great command over evil spirits, because it's 5 acute angles inside 5 obtuse angles without. So its interior pentacle contains many great mysteries. So if you have an upward star and then you take the shape inside, it basically creates a downward star. So Agrippa's basically saying, that the downward star has many, as far as the inverted pentagram, has many great mysteries hidden within it. Let's see. The pentalpha was used throughout the East as a health talisman to cast out evil. This philosopher Monet, he says that it is found in Egypt on the statues of Anubis. And the Druids wore the pentacle, or the pentalph, on their sandals as a symbol of the deity. And they called it the Drutenfuß. But in German, right, which is the druid's foot, which is the witch's foot, essentially, right? Now, medieval Masons considered the pentalpha as a symbol of deep wisdom, and the triple triangle as the union of the 3 ancient grand masters coming together. Now, if you back to the Masonic Encyclopedia in Mackey, right? He says that Solomon's seal was a double interlaced triangle whose form gives the outline of the 6-pointed star, right? So most of the sources you see say it has a pentalpha or a pentagram, whereas the Masons believe that it had the star of Rephes? Remphin, there you go. That's something I've been meaning to get more into lately. It's
it's wild.
It's pretty deep. So
Yeah.
But the Masons say it's the star of Remphin. So now using this ring to call upon demons, Solomon would basically call these demons up, and by binding them with the ring, he would get their star symbol, and the zodiac symbol, which related to each demon, right? And the first demon to appear to Solomon was Ouranios, who was the vampire spirit. And this was the demon that was stealing his favorite page's food. So basically, the first thing he did was find out who was stealing this food, right? And so he took this vampire spirit, Ouranos, and he set him to the task of cutting stones for the temple. And then he took Ouranos and basically told Ouranos to bring forth the king of the demons, right? Because he wanted to talk to the one that ruled over all the demons. So Arenas went to Tartaria or Sheol or hell, whatever you want to call it, and basically went to Beelzebub, and Beelzebub was forced to appear before Solomon with the ring. And Beelzebub told Solomon that he was the only fallen angel left now on the earthly realm, who still survived and now ruled over all the spirits of Tartaria.
What?
Yeah, yeah.
That's
So
crazy.
now the demon of ashes is another demon he summoned up called Tetroth, right? And he appeared with 7 female spirits who claimed to be the 36 elements of darkness, who were put to work to dig the foundations of the temple. So he took these 7 female spirits who were the 36 elements of darkness and put them to work to dig the where the foundation would be for the temple itself. And some of these demons he made to wrestle with fire to make plates and spoons of metal, which were said to be all of gold when you look at the texts. So now the cornerstone of the temple itself, as far as the setting of the cornerstone, and here we're getting into Masonic philosophy, as far as, you know, the Masons setting the cornerstone and the wine and the corn and the oil. But the cornerstone of the temple was said to be raised up out of the Red Sea. And it was a stone so big that no human could move it. And basically, Solomon used a demon from Arabia who he had trapped in a bottle. And he used this demon to basically levitate this stone out of the Red Sea and set it into place as the cornerstone of Solomon's temple.
So now we know how the pyramids were built. It solves the mystery, right? That's so funny. It's weird. Sorry to interrupt you real quick.
No, not at all. Not at all.
I saw a movie like not long ago on like Prime or whatever, some cheesy like random movie. It's called 3,000 Years of Longing, and it's about a genie or a jinn. They refer to him as a jinn in the movie, who falls in love with a human woman. Well, he has fallen in love multiple times throughout the years, but anyways, he gets cast into a bottle for the first time by King Solomon as he's like making love to the Queen of Sheba.
Ooh.
And he's like refers to Solomon as like a super powerful like wizard, blah blah blah. Anyway, I thought it was weird that like I just saw that.
Yeah.
Ago.
Interesting. Yeah. What was it called?
3,000 Years of Longing.
Longing. Interesting. That's a good name.
Yeah, it is. That's why I clicked on it. I was like, ooh.
Now, so with all of this demon summoning, and, you know, he's marrying all these wives, and basically he's starting to participate in the rituals of these other cultures, right? And at one point, one of his wives gives Solomon 5 locusts, and he has them in his hand, and he basically crushes them and eats them in service to Moloch, right? As one of his wives instructed him to do. And this was the point it was said that the spirit of Jehovah moved away from Solomon, right?
I was gonna say, like, how long is God like putting up with this for? I don't know.
Well, and consistently, when you trace down the history of the Ibiru to the Israelites, into the Hebrews, through the temple system, they call it backsliding, and constantly, you know, Yahweh was upset with the Hebrews for backsliding into these nefarious practices of the worshiping of the Queen of the Heavens, being Inanna Ishtar, Semiramis Rhea, and the constant worshiping of the golden calf, which gets into Zoroastrianism and Mithra and the Apis bull of Egypt.
Yeah, all the bull symbolism.
Yeah, and the bull symbolism, as far as the sacrifice and the turning of the zodiacal wheel within the heavens,
Right.
Something I did want to bring up that I probably should have brought up a while ago. But there's been multiple things now that really want me to bring it up. I want to mention it at least. And not too I hate using the Goetia or the R's, whatever, King Solomon and that stuff. I hate always pointing at that for demon shit, but it is what it is. But even going by that type of magic, Solomon supposedly rendered 72 demons and stuffed them in this thing and took control of them, and that's exactly how this thing was built supposedly. And then there was something else that was mentioned before, and I think Lisa had mentioned it in the chat. Looking at a lot of grimoires, and especially this one, this is why I'm going back to this one again. Depending on what things you're working with, there is even suggested different types of garbs, and then certain sigils or symbols that you will also use. A lot of the times, you're also, I think, going to use its own sigil anyway. I think as a way of enforcement, saying that I'm controlling this. But there is certain type of garb that you'll use, and then you have to wonder, going back at even besides Mormons, I think even Jehovah's Witnesses or plenty of other weird religions or people that would deem weird, do have some very kind of specific garb shit to be used during specific things that they think is religious, that to some people we would say that's more ritualistic. It's the same thing really, but it's just very weird how going by just from things, very basic ideas of messing with demons or at least summoning things. You go back to specific specific dressings. I don't know, and then you're talking, and then when it comes to the Goetia and King Solomon, I mean, there's all this again. I see commonalities.
And when you get into the 6th and 7th books of Moses, where a lot of the sigil magic comes out of, they have no Hebrew origin. They actually came out later during the Hellenistic time, I believe, and but that was a lot of the argument in the esoteric circles, was the fact that these later sigil magic books of Moses basically have no origin within the Hebrew canonical structure. They're basically, but like we were talking about Solomon, summoning the demon and getting his star and his astrological symbol. When you get into the sigil magic, and the sigils are base, and it's said that once you get these things to come and talk to you, that they'll give you more specific symbols. So you'll have more direct access to them. Basically, higher levels of the sigils, and again, this comes back to sympathetic magic. And you were talking about certain sacerdotal or garments that they would use, and the color, the incense you would burn, the gems you would have on the altar. All these things would be sympathetic to this force that you're wishing to manifest, So yeah, it's but it is interesting that the sigil magic and all these practices are not part of the Hebrew philosophy. They're things that have consistently come in and corrupted the Hebrews through time. So now it was said that after he crushed and ate these locusts, that this was when Solomon lost his strength and his wisdom. And Solomon began to build other temples to other gods, such as Baal and Rephaim. And let's see. For being the architect, the grand architect of the temple itself, within the Hiram thinking. It was said that Hiram was allowed to enter heaven without dying, just like Enoch and Elijah and the witnesses. I mean, it's, you know, we have numerous instances of people being able to enter back into heaven in different philosophies. But at this point, Hiram was believed to be able to enter back into heaven without dying. And when the temple was completed, a voice, an etheric voice, was said to be heard saying, "You all shall have a share in the world to come." And at this point is when Queen of Sheba, who was a sorceress, was summoned after the temple was finished, right? And now the Queen of Sheba, who the Jews and the Arabs call Balkis, or in the Bible and other sources, you sometimes see her called Queen Saba, right? Sheba basically brings a caravan of valuable gifts to Solomon and the Israelites, and let's see, with camels bearing spices and very much gold and precious stones, is a quote from the Arabian Felix from Yemen. Kings 1:10-2 says, "Never again came such an abundance of spices." Providing, and she came in and basically asked him all these questions and kind of gave him some riddles. And the Song of Solomon, which is Solomon's, is about Sheba, who became the queen of Ethiopia later. And in the Coptic, the queen is seduced by deceit, the deceit of Solomon. So Solomon betrays the Queen of Sheba in the Coptic, which are the Egyptian, later Egyptian texts, right? And so the Queen of Sheba ended up fleeing through the course of all this political activity. There was arguments between the wives that was going on, and basically she had to flee, and she took with her the Solomonic line as far as the offspring of Menelik the first, and she also took with her the original, they say the original Bible, into Ethiopia, which is why the Ethiopian Bible is the most complete Bible, they say. Let's see. I've got here. Okay, so now the oldest Bible, the Ethiopian Bible, the most complete, has 81 books total, right?
Mhm.
And the King James Bible has 66 books. And some will say that it's actually, what is it, 74 books, but that's only if you include the apocryphal, which are in some of the later Bibles, but they are not considered as canonical. So if you only consider the canonical books within the King James Bible, there's 66 books, which is interesting in regard to numerology.
You know,
Yes.
something I want to mention real quick that I totally forgot about this. Ethiopia, me and Teresa had covered Italy and fascism, something like that.
Yep.
And they, Italy had went over to Ethiopia and actually took the lion, some kind of, I think, like painting or something, or some kind of like whatever art. And I think they also
Samadhi stone as well, I've heard.
And I think they also took a oh god, what are those things that stick up out of the ground?
Obelisk.
Yeah, and they took an obelisk, and like I was like, you know what? Obviously, you know there was occult symbolism. Even the lion thing looks very much like even stuff that I've seen Crowley use and depict and
I
stuff.
think it was like a statue or something.
And the whole thing is that I was looking at it, and at that time I thought it was really interesting, and I had no idea that at that time Ethiopia was like under some like Solomonic dynasty.
Yeah.
Where like they actually thought they were descendants from this dude.
100%.
And
Yeah.
I was like, yo, that had to be something to do with like occultism and all this shit.
Going all the way back to the Temple of Solomon.
That Italy went over there and like took
Right.
occult relics from a place and kind of like fucked with, and I think had concentration camps possibly.
And
I don't remember what they did, but
yeah, I would say these were probably relics that were said to be brought from the Temple of Solomon.
Probably.
Except for maybe the obelisk, being Egyptian, but it ties in, subvertly nonetheless. So now the Queen of Sheba, when you get into the spice trade, this is in Yemen and Ethiopia, but they were running spices, slaves, gold, ivory, incense, textiles, jewelry, and exotic animals. And this was basically the crossroads of the world, with the caravan routes that were going on, basically crossed where the Queen of Sheba's empire was. And her father ended up getting, I believe, assassinated, and she was forced into power, and there was all this coup stuff going on. But let's see. Let's get into the throne of Solomon now. It was built of gold and encrusted with jewels and consisted of 6 steps, with the 7th being where the seat itself was, right? So we got 7 steps, just like the 7-letter God names. There's this consistent machination of 7 in regard to the manufacture and creation of physical reality, right? And on these steps, as you go up these steps, on each side of the steps were different animals, right? And on the first step was an ox and a lion. The second step was a wolf and a lamb. The third step was a leopard and a goat. The fourth step was an eagle and a peacock. The fifth step was a falcon and a cock. The sixth step was a hawk and a sparrow. And then on the throne itself was a hawk, which may have some ties in relation to Horus, right? But the hawk was in the clutches of the claws of a dove with its wings outspread, being the Shekinah, or the feminine spirit, the Holy Spirit in essence of itself, over all these other forces going down the steps, which I think is symbolically very interesting.
yeah, I mean, there's even like secret societies that use devil symbolism.
Right. And there was a whole thing that these steps and this step system of these different symbols leading to this dove with the hawk of Horus in its clutches was to symbolize a time when all the people of the world would be delivered into the hands of Israel, is what the texts say, right? And all of these animals were mechanically animated and made each their own noise. So this whole throne was a mechanical device, right? And when you get into some of the later stories, because it eventually gets carried away when the temple is toppled, right? And I think it was Xerxes who ended up taking it at one point, and he tried to sit in it, and something happened, and he basically got a really bad wound on his hip that caused him to limp, and he never tried to sit in it again.
Oh man.
Yeah, so there's somehow, you had to know how to sit in it as well. It's a pretty wild little story. Solomon was also said to possess a 60 square mile carpet, which was said to fly for transportation. Now here we go. And in building the altar, no tool of iron were ever to be allowed. And Solomon summoned up Asmodeus, right? And captured him, and he was led by gold chains, keeping him in chains his whole life. But he used Asmodeus to basically get the shamir. Are you familiar with the shamir?
No, somebody
No,
did
but
bring that up in the chat earlier. Wow. Okay. Awesome.
they're
Yeah,
asking
so-
if you talked about it before. So here we
Yes.
go.
The shamir was basically this, it's sort of a bug that its saliva almost would, it could break down stone, right? So Asmodeus went and found where these bugs were, and they had these what they call the moor hens that would dig the shamir up and like eat them. And basically, when the moor hens dug these things up, Asmodeus brought them to Solomon, and they used these bugs to carve the altar. As you know, it was against the law of Yahweh for the stones to be hewn by man, basically relating to the Masons and keeping out of the temple, right? Which is why there's such a big contention later on with the Hiramites, who became the Samaritans, between the Samaritans and the Jews, which you see over and over. So now Solomon told Asmodeus he did not understand how the king of the demons was so great if he could be kept in chains by a mortal. And Asmodeus said, "Remove me from my chains and give me your ring, and he would prove his greatness," right? So for some reason, Solomon lets him loose and gives him the ring.
Sounds like some Sauron shit right there.
I believe it was some sort of a Faustian bargain that was going on here.
Yeah.
As far as the slow, gradual leading into the, if you read Faust, it's, but so Asmodeus became as big as the sky, with one wing touching the earth and the other touching the cosmos. And he snatched Solomon up, right? And he threw him 400 parsecs away from Jerusalem. And then Asmodeus threw the ring into the sea, right? And then Asmodeus shapeshifts into Solomon and becomes King Solomon and begins running the temple.
Stop.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So now at this point, Solomon, he's 400 parsecs away, right? And he basically has nothing. So he becomes a beggar, and he's going around. He's like, "No, you don't understand. I'm King Solomon." And they're like, "Yeah, sure you are."
Nice one, bro.
Yeah, yeah. And everybody thought he was crazy. And after a long while, he ends up becoming a cook in Amon. And because he could cook such good fish, he was like the best. King Solomon cooked the best fish, right? So basically, he got hired into this royal house, and he ends up, the daughter becomes kind of obsessed with him, and because he cooked such good fish, they ended up letting him marry the daughter. And then he gets this fish out of the ocean from the market, right? And when he cuts the fish open to skin it and clean it, the ring that Asmodeus had thrown into the sea was in the fish's stomach.
I knew that's what you were gonna say.
Yeah. So Solomon gets the ring back, and when he puts it on, he instantly like transports back to the Temple of Solomon.
This is Lord of the Rings. What
I know,
the
right?
heck? Jeez, J.R.R. Tolkien. Okay.
So let's see. So he transports back to Jerusalem with his new wife, the daughter of the king of Amon. So now I guess he has 701 wives. And he takes the throne back. And after this whole event happened, right? Solomon was said to have a demon foot, like his foot had become deformed into this demon foot, which they said he always tried to keep hid.
Wow.
Oh, I don't know, if it has anything to do with the demon foot, but I'm just wondering if like the symbolism is playing off of something here. But like I've even noticed, and honestly, I think it was more of Mario and Megan bringing it up, covering the tarot series. I mean, you will see difference in with feet sticking out or not.
Yeah.
from robes and clothes, like some, or their feet in different positions. Like you have to start to wonder, like, is that for a reason?
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. So now the prophet warns of doom for Solomon's bloodline for his dealing in demons and worshiping false gods. And Jeroboam actually began to rise up against Solomon and had to flee to Egypt because they were going to execute him, right? But Solomon dies at the age of 80. Some sources say 60. And the people forsook his son Rehoboam and ordained Jeroboam over the tribes of Israel in the north. And Jeroboam, at the Feast of Tabernacles, immediately builds 2 temples for the tribes of Bethel and Dan, both having golden heifers in the temple. Right. So immediately they're already moving away, while Rehoboam ruled the south over the tribes of Judah and Benjamin. And at the the Feast of the Tabernacles, let's see. Oh, and then I go into there was an African uprising of the Shishaks that raid the temple, and they carry away all the treasure. The shield Solomon made, the golden quiver of arrows David had taken from King Zobar, and tens of thousands in gold and silver. So already we're seeing the breaking down. And I've got many back and forth from following the law to backsliding. And here I have a series of dates I'm just going to cover real quick of some major elements that happen, because we're basically going to go into the fall here, and then that'll pretty much wrap it up.
Sure.
But we've got, let's see, in BC 925, Pharaoh Shishak invades Jerusalem. In 900 BC, Ethiopia invades Judah, defeated by King Asa, who was a follower of the laws of Yahweh. In 853 BC, the Battle of Kukar. 842 BC, the deaths of Ahaziah and Jeroham. This ends the Davidic line of the Temple of Solomon temporarily. And then in 836 BC, the crowning of Joash restored the Davidic line. And then in 739, Assyria began to dominate over the temple. And this is at the point that we have the character of Jezebel that basically set up temples to Belus and Baal, or Bel and Marduk, and planted a grove. When you get into the sacred mysteries, the ancient idea of the grove. And her husband was King Ahab, who's the captain in Moby Dick, right?
Right. Yeah.
But he had 400 prophets that he kind of carried around with him that he used for advice and prophecy on a regular basis. In 727 BC, Hezekiah restores the temple and celebrates the first Passover ever. In 640, Josiah restores the temple and again celebrates Passover. In 586 BC was the fall of the temple, the first temple, right? So this is basically after Solomon dies, it subsides up into 586. So we're looking at about 400 years of the temple, basically, and the sacrifices and all the movement of goods and services and trading. So now at this point, King Nebuchadnezzar, who he built up a tower next to the temple against the walls of Jerusalem, and basically the Israelites were like, yeah, we don't really care. We're protected by God, right? And the citizens were content and not afraid. And this siege by Nebuchadnezzar went on for 18 months. and the Israelites were destroyed by famine, basically, right? And the city was taken on the 9th day of the 4th month of the 11th year of the reign of Zedekiah. And Zedekiah escaped with his family through a ditch, but was caught by the troops of Nebuchadnezzar. And he took him and his family to Babylon, to the court of Nebuchadnezzar, right? And Zedekiah's children were slain in front of him. And then Zedekiah's eyes were put out, and basically he stayed in Babylon as a blinded king, under the slave tutelage of Nebuchadnezzar. And after the line of David ends, there were 21 kings in total, for a total of 514 years, 6 months, and 10 days. So over 500 years. This is 2.5 times the length that the United States has been around. Think about that. That this temple basically ruled in this region, right? And Nebuchadnezzar sent his general Nebuchadnezzar to pillage the temple and to lay it even with the ground and to bring all its people to Babylon, right? And he carried away all the treasure of Solomon and lit fire to the temple, burning the temple and the palace and overthrowing the city. And when the temple burnt, it was 470 years, 6 months, and 10 days after it was built, right? And this being 1,062 years, 6 months, and 10 days after the Exodus. And all the people, the eunuchs, and the priests were brought to Babylon, where all the high priests were decapitated. And this was the end of the Israelites, right? And the kingdom of Jerusalem now being twice removed, essentially. That once at the end. And so this was said to essentially be the end of the 12 tribes of Israel. And they were scattered within so the 10 tribes, 10 of the tribes were carried out by the Sumerians and the Assyrians by King Hoseir, and 2 of the tribes were carried back to Babylon by Nebuchadnezzar. And the Kuthians, so now the king, Nebuchadnezzar, high king of Babylon, basically takes the Kuthians, right? And he takes these Kuthian people and installs them in Jerusalem to replace the Hebrew line. And when you get into orphan trains, and when you get into great resets, and when you get into, you consistently see in the histories that they'll wipe a people out, and then they'll bring a whole different culture in to take its place. And then when you get into modern times with Zygmunt Brzezinski and Henry Kissinger and using immigrants as soft weapons of war,
I was just going to say, yeah.
Right along the same lines, right? But these Kuthians were brought into the city to replace the Israelites. And these Kuthians were the Samaritans. So they took the Samaritans and basically put them in the place of who were the Hiramites, right? To replace the 10 tribes, and taking their name from Cutha in their home of Samaria, of Persia and Media. But Jerusalem and the temple would lay deserted for 70 years at this point. And the Israelites were exiled to Babylon for 130 years, 6 months, and 10 days. And then after that, later on, we can go into like King Cyrus and go into the fall of the Second Temple, and then kind of cover some of the groups coming out of the fall of the temple, being the Knights Templar, Knights of St. John, and some of these esoteric movements that have brought forth what the modern world is with the crown.
Awesome, thank you. That was a whole lot of stuff right there.
I know, right?
Yeah. There was something I did want to just bring up that somebody brought up in the chat. Oh, well, now I probably won't. They did bring up Zabouth. I don't know if I'm saying it correctly or how you pronounced it before, but it stands for Lord of Hosts. I think you might have mentioned it before and said that you couldn't find a meaning for it.
Yeah,
Um,
that's good.
what I
Thank
thought
you.
was interesting about that is that I did throw that word into gematria, and the Hebrew value to even that word is 666,
Interesting.
and then the simple gematria would be 77, and
77.
Netzach in simple gematria is 77, and I do think the Lord of Hosts might be associated with that sphere with Hermetic Kabbalah. I could be off.
Yeah.
But I found that to be very interesting. And like Netzach is even the seventh sphere. So I mean you're even getting 777 in a sense.
777.
Yeah. So yeah, that was just like a weird rabbit hole that I went down when I was looking at all of the amazing comments being left in chat. Unfortunately,
Yes.
I probably got lost a few times in there because it was just there was a lot of stuff, honestly.
It
Yeah,
was
it's a
good.
lot of information.
Yeah, no, that's why I love the chat because you'll get a lot of different people adding to things that you're saying, whatever.
Right.
You know, there was a lot of that going on. I love
Well,
it.
and that's the thing, going through this, honestly, I have way, way, way more information. I try to just like cherry pick some of the more fun, kind of interesting factor. But I also wanted to show the opulence of what this temple was and how big it was, and just the amount of gold, silver, sacrifice,
Yeah.
ruling over this region, which is current modern, Israel and the Temple Mount, essentially.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was trying when we were just talking at the end, I was trying to confirm a tweet that I saw somebody posted a screenshot of, but it looks like the tweet has maybe since been deleted or it's like way back in time. I
Right.
don't know. But so actually it's Susan Harrell, Susie Q's, who posted this yesterday, I believe. It was a screenshot of a tweet from Temple Institute. And they had a picture of Israel soldiers in front of some graffiti. So the graffiti says, build the holy temple. And then the rest of the words say, sorry, 1 second. It says, the battle is in Gaza. The war is over the Temple Mount.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
So just to
And,
give it like,
well, that's
still reaches into like current time.
times, right?
Yeah.
And that's why I think this is a very relevant subject in
Absolutely.
regard to what we talked about last time, going back to pre-flood and how this ties in with this altar and Solomon's temple. And again, this is the same place that Muhammad had his night journey and started the Muslim philosophy is at this, which is why you have the different mosques and the different the Temple Mount, and then getting into the Templars, digging under the temple and finding ancient mystic treasures that made them rich beyond belief. So yeah, it's a deep subject that ties religion, esotericism, and night chivalry, like all of these things into it is the temple at the center of time,
The story of all stories.
right? Or the greatest story ever told,
Right?
as the Grateful Dead would say.
Very well said.
Oh, for real.
Thank you both very much for spending so much time between talking before the show and about now. This was about almost 2 hours, so I really appreciate that. That was a lot of information, and there was a lot to.
Glad we got through it all.
You did awesome, Robby.
And this will for people listening to the live now, or people listening to it, after the fact, this will probably stay up for about a week. So if you want to listen to it again, you got it for about a week, and then I'll re-drop it as an episode within a few weeks. So I pretty much just go live just so I can get people in the chat and get all I love the comments lately, and I got a lot of good people that keep showing up and adding to what the guest has. So, I mean, I'm really kind of going live for that because I really do think people jump in on the lives or even rewatch this and watch the comments that I put up. If you watch the video, you will actually get more information as well.
Cool.
So,
Mhm.
so definitely check out these shows if you can visually, in my opinion. Yeah, and that is the. Well, I'll let you guys plug your stuff also. Teresa, you go first.
Yeah, so if anyone wants to check out more of me, please come over to the Spiritual Gangsters podcast. Try to catch us live Tuesday mornings with Clown World Weekly. And yeah, that's it.
Awesome. Thank you again. And Robby, let everybody know where they can find your stuff.
Yeah, I'm on Instagram, Facebook. You can find all my links on my link tree, which is RMarx, all one word. And if you're interested in stuff like this, go check out my MettaMindcasts. I get into numerous esoteric and occult subjects and how they tie in with our modern beliefs and how culture moves, essentially.
Awesome. And I will include your links as soon as I get off of here. Thank you very much, Robby, for coming on again. You know, I always look forward to having you on. And hopefully we'll be able to schedule a part 3 sooner than later, actually. Yeah, and that is the end of another NY Patriot show. And until the next one, everybody be well. Later.